Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to turn back and camp in front of Pi Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, in front of Baal Zephon. You shall camp opposite by the sea. Pharaoh will say of the Israelites, 'They are wandering aimlessly in the land, and the wilderness has closed in on them.' I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, so that I will gain glory for myself over Pharaoh and all his army. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord." And they did so. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, the minds of Pharaoh and his officials were changed toward the people. And they said, "What have we done, letting Israel leave our service?" So he had his chariot made ready and took his army with him. He took 600 picked chariots and all other chariots of Egypt, with his officers all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of the Pharaoh king of Egypt, and he pursued the Israelites who were going out boldly. The Egyptians pursued them, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, and his chariots' drivers, and his army. They overtook them camped by the sea, by Pi Hahiroth, in front of Baal Zephon. As Pharaoh drew near, the Israelites looked back, and they were there, Egyptians advancing on them. In great fear, the Israelites cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, bringing us out of Egypt? Is this not the very thing we told you in Egypt? Let us alone and let us serve the Egyptians. For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than die in the wilderness." But Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm and see the deliverance that the Lord will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you only have to keep still." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward, but you lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the Israelites may go into the sea on dry ground. Then I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, so they will go after and after them. And so I will gain glory for myself over the Pharaoh and his army, his chariots and his chariot drivers. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I have gained glory for myself over Pharaoh, his chariots, and his chariot drivers."
The angel of God was going before the Israelite army, moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud moved from in front of them and took its place behind them. It came between the army of Egypt and the army of Israel. And so the cloud was there with the darkness, and it lit up the night. One did not come near the other all night. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. The Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and turned the sea into dry ground, and the waters were divided. The Israelites went into the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and their left. The Egyptians pursued and went into the sea after them, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and chariot drivers. At the morning watch, the Lord in the pillar of fire and cloud looked down upon the Egyptian army and threw the Egyptian army into panic. He clogged their chariot wheels so that they turned to defeat. The Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the Israelites, and the Lord is fighting with them against Egypt." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the water may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots and chariot drivers." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at dawn the sea returned to its normal depth. As the Egyptians fled before it, the Lord tossed the Egyptians into the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the chariot drivers. The entire army of Pharaoh had followed them into the sea. Not one of them remained. But the Israelites walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great work that the Lord did against the Egyptians. So the people feared the Lord and believed in the Lord and did his servant.
What do you think, Jackie? Pretty unfair that you got started with super names, right? Well, after that choir thing, I think we can just stop. I'm good. I'm going to wear a robe because I'd be a puddle of water before. Our New Testament reading comes from John chapter 20, verses 1 through 18. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb. We do not know where they have laid him." Then Peter and the other disciple set out and went toward the tomb. The two were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent down to look in and saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he did not go in. And then Simon Peter came following him and went into the tomb. He saw the linen wrappings lying there and the cloth that had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen wrappings, but rolled up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple who reached the tomb first also went in, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not understand the scripture, that he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples returned to their homes. But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb, and she saw two angels in white sitting where the body of Jesus had been lying, one at the head and the other at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." When she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you looking for?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you've laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Hebrew, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Do not hold on to me, because I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord," and she told them that he had said these things to her. He is risen. Hallelujah. Jesus came up out of the grave, and today is Easter morning, the celebration of new life and resurrection. And I ask you, so what? Who cares? I mean, okay, it's a cool thing. We get to come and gather together and hear really good music, so that makes me happy. But this whole Easter thing, I mean, if people die and go to heaven in some type of a natural preset progression, what's this thing with Jesus coming out of the tomb and being resurrected? Because after all, he just ended up going back up to heaven anyway, leaving us here on our own. So what's the big deal? Why are we even sitting here this morning? We could all be sleeping in or out enjoying the weather, biking by the lake. But nope, here we are, celebrating something that just doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. Unless we're missing something. Unless there's some deeper meaning that we're not quite grasping. James was a very religious man. James belonged to a church that did not believe in medical intervention for healing. They believed that God would heal and only God would heal. And so through prayer and fasting and meditation, people could be miraculously healed. And they had a number of instances of this in their church. And so they kept going with it, even when James became ill. And James went to the doctor, not, mind you, so that he could be cured by the doctor, but so that he could get a diagnosis, find out why he was losing weight and not really able to eat and not feeling so hot. He just wanted to know why and what kind of a name they could give to his malady so that when he asked people to pray for him, that he could ask them to pray for it by name. And so the doctor gave him an answer. The doctor said, "James, you have liver cancer." But good news was, it was just a tiny little spot. And so the doctor said, if we get on this right now, we can do surgery, we can cut out that tiny little section right there, and get you some radiation, and you will be good to go. You'll be fine. You got a great chance of survival. And James said, "No, thank you, doctor. I appreciate your time. I'm going to go back to my church and seek healing from God." And so the ritual began. Folks put their hands over where his liver is, and they prayed that God would take away his sickness. And they prayed for it by name. God, take away this liver cancer so that our brother James might be alive to tell the story of your healing and your miracles. And they kept on praying. They kept on fasting even as he continued to lose weight and eventually became bedridden and couldn't even feed himself. And they were there when he died of his cancer. And so that next morning, when they went to church on Sunday, after the pastor all this time, along with James, had been saying, keep praying, because God works in God's own time. God works on a different calendar than we do. But the outcome was still James' death. And so on that Sunday morning, the pastor stood up to a bunch of people glaring at him. People were really ticked off with the system. They started to wonder if there might be a different way to go about things. And the pastor, in typical cliched fashion, said, God works in mysterious ways. God must have needed James up there with the angels for some reason or another. We can't understand the mind of God, so let's rejoice that James is reunited with God. The little old gal stood up in the back of the church and said, Pastor, this is about enough. God gave us doctors. Why don't we use them? And the pastor argued back for a little bit, but a ruckus ensued and people started to get pretty ticked off. And so he quickly realized the people weren't going to go along with this faith healing business anymore without using the resources at hand that God had given them to do such things. And I think it just goes to show that sometimes there's a deeper meaning that we don't grasp. Sometimes our version of faith becomes so solidified, so stuck, that we come to a point where it's difficult for us to see different possibilities, where it becomes very difficult for us to see the meaning in the situation. And I think that's where we find ourselves here on Easter morning, some almost 2,000 years later, after a Galilean walked out of a tomb and left angels there to tell the story. Well, let's look at these scenarios. There are 4 scenarios in the 4 different Gospels, very different. Mark is the shortest. It's only 8 verses. There is no account of Jesus talking to anybody. They go to the tomb, it's empty, there's an angel, said, who are you looking for? He's not here anymore. The end. Okay. You've got Matthew and Luke who have stories of angels. One has 1 angel, one has 2 angels. In fact, one of them does not even have an angel at all. Jesus is standing there to greet them. And Jesus says, in one account, go tell the disciples to go to Galilee if they want to find me. In another account, he says, tell the disciples to go to Jerusalem if they want to find me. But I love this account from John. He doesn't tell Mary to go anywhere. He tells her to tell the disciples that he is going back to God. Your Father and my Father, your God and my God. But he says this key phrase that I think we miss. Mary, let go of me. Let go of me. I have not yet returned to the Father. When we put all this together and we start to think, why is the world still so screwed up? All of these years later, after Jesus has come up out of the tomb to make everything hunky-dory, why are we still looking around us and seeing consternation and despair and violence and all of these things that just need a good dose of hope? Why are these things still in existence? I think that there is some truth in these texts that we miss when we extrapolate the meaning. See, because it's not about facticity, about whether Jesus physically walked out of a tomb or not. That matters. But if we stop there, we miss the meaning. So what if he walked out of the tomb? What does that mean for us? What are these texts saying? And I think when we look at the full progression of Jesus' life and ministry, we start to make some sense out of these accounts. Because we have 4 different writers in 4 different contexts saying 4 different things, but yet in a way saying the same thing, but yet they have a special meaning, each of their own. And that is, recall when Jesus was at the Transfiguration, and he came down off the mountaintop after being up there with Peter and Andrew, and then Elijah and Moses appeared. Remember that? And he came down off the mountain, and this man runs to him and says, Jesus, my son has a demon, and I asked your disciples here to heal him, and they said they couldn't do it. What happened? Jesus got kicked off. He said, what is the matter with you people? How long must I be here with you? I showed you how to do these things. I taught you how to do these things, and yet you do not do these things. I still have to be here with you to do them for you. And then there's Mary, grabbing onto him as he's in that tomb, walking out. He said, Mary, the message is still the same. Let go of me. Let go. Why in one account does he tell the disciples that they want to find me, go to Galilee? Because that's where it all began. Where it all began with this man that hardly anybody knew, who opened this scroll of Isaiah and read to it, say that the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for I have come to preach good news, freedom for the captive, sight for the blind, hope for the hopeless. You don't get it? If you want to find me, back to the beginning. What did I say back there? And then he tells the others, if you want to find me, go to Jerusalem. Well, what about Jerusalem? Jerusalem is where it ended. If you don't get A, maybe you'll get B. See the things I said over here? See the things I did over here? I knew that what I was doing was going to cost me my life. I knew if I fought the Roman authorities, who thought that if they put me in this tomb, if they put me up on that cross, that they are going to shut me up and be done with me. Jesus said, please do not let that happen. Because if you do not do as I did, if you do not do as I have said, then I will stay in this tomb. And nothing will ever happen. And it will all be meaningless. The boys just read a passage from Exodus. And you can see this amazing event as all of these Israelites, by the thousands, by the tens of thousands, are crossing the Red Sea, and there's water up on both sides, these walls of water. Imagine the sound, the roar in their ears, and the echo as they're walking through this tunnel of water. And they start to freak out. Can't blame them. I mean, they're wondering how long are these things going to last. And they turn around and look back, and there's all those Egyptians running at them with chariots and horses and spears and just ready to dig into them. And they say to Moses, what is the point of this? Did we run out of graves back in Egypt, so you had to take us out to the desert so we could die there? Only a place to bury us there, I guess. Thanks a lot. How's that for a snarky comment? I love it. I'm going to use that sometime. But you see, these people were not trusting. They felt hopeless. They thought, oh, okay, so you saved us from the Egyptians. Well, I'd rather go back there because I knew what that was like. But now you're trying to drag me out. And what is the point of it all? And Moses, oh, these people are yelling at me. These people are freaking out. What am I supposed to do? And he starts crying out to God. And what does God say? Kind of the same thing that Jesus said. Why are you crying out to me? Look behind you. My angel is there between you and the Egyptians. Look in front of you. See that pillar of fire showing you where to go? How can you miss it? I've given you what you need. Don't cry out to me. Do it. And so, here's Jesus, standing outside of a tomb with a woman who didn't even recognize him anymore. Thought he was the gardener. See, in the story, we always say that down on Friday, up on Sunday, right? Into the tomb, 3 days later, back out of the tomb. Do the math. He went out on Friday night, came up on Sunday morning. It's about 36, 37 hours. It's not 3 days. And where does it say on the next Sabbath she went to the tomb? We kind of read into that, don't we? We build our own stories. And that's fine if that's the actual story. But is that what has the meaning? Does it have to be 3 days? We can't overlook the important stuff. The meaning. Letting go and doing the things that we have been taught and been given the strength and power of God to do, just as God told Moses. Look around. It's obvious. Just as Jesus told Mary, I'm going back to God. And you need to do the same. In all of these 4 Gospels, we find that the resurrection story is the last story in the Gospels. Is that because that's the end of the story? No. That's because it's just the beginning. But it's up to us to write the rest.